"What in the hell do you think you're doing up here, old-timer?" The voice, sharp and filled with irritation, cut through the low howl of the wind across the flight deck. Lieutenant Commander Bennett, her flight suit crisp, her posture stiff, stared at the old man in the faded red coveralls. He stood near the silent, huge bulk of Catapult 1, an FA-18 Super Hornet chained to it like a sleeping beast. The man, Frank Sullivan, was a fixture in the ship's lower levels. He managed the waste disposal and recycling plants, a ghost who haunted the lower decks, ensuring the complex system of the aircraft carrier USS Defiance didn't choke on its own garbage. He was 78 years old with hands like twisted oak roots and eyes that seemed to hold the calm, deep gray of the ocean itself. He didn't flinch at the officer's tone. He simply stood, his look not on her, but on the seam where the Catapult shuttle met the flight deck, as if listening to a conversation no one else could hear. "Chief, get your man out of a restricted area now," Bennett snapped, turning her glare on Chief Petty Officer Davis, who had brought Frank to the deck. Davis, a man whose face was a roadmap of 2 decades at sea, stood his ground. "Ma'am, with all due respect, Mr. Sullivan thinks he might know what the problem is." Bennett let out a short, disbelieving laugh. The sound was thin and brittle against the vastness of the sky. "He thinks he knows. Chief, my entire engineering team, the top aviation technicians in the fleet, and a live satellite link with Boeing, have been troubleshooting this for 6 hours. The main steam valve is seized. The digital checks are giving us nothing but error codes. We are dead in the water on our primary launch catapult, and you bring me the garbage man." The insult hung in the air, thick and greasy as hydraulic fluid. Several members of the deck crew, their faces slick with sweat and frustration, shuffled their feet. They had been running checks until their eyes burned. They had cross-referenced every manual, every update, every technical bulletin, nothing. The carrier, a multi-billion-dollar projection of American power, was crippled by a single stubborn piece of machinery. Frank finally turned his head, his movement slow and careful. His eyes met Bennett's, and for a moment, the sheer force of his calm seemed to unbalance her. He wasn't scared. He wasn't angry. He was simply present. "The pressure isn't equalizing on the launch valve accumulator," Frank said. His voice was a low rumble worn by time. "It's not a digital fault, it's mechanical. The system thinks it's working, but the steam is bleeding back into the condenser before it can build a full head." Bennett stared, her mouth slightly open. "And you know this how? Did you read it on a discarded coffee cup in the trash compactor?" The cruelty of the line was meant to dismiss him, to put him back in his place, but it didn't land. Frank's expression didn't change. "I can hear it," he said simply. "Or rather, I can't hear it. There should be a low hum from the number 3 bleed line, a vibration. It's not there. The silence is the problem." "This is absurd," Bennett said, her voice rising. "I don't have time for sea stories and old wisdom. We are in the middle of a critical readiness exercise. We have F-18s that need to fly. We have a schedule to keep. My career and the reputation of this ship is on the line." She took a step closer to Frank, invading his space. "I need you to leave the flight deck. That is a direct order. Chief, escort him below." Chief Davis looked from Bennett's furious face to Frank's peaceful one. He felt a knot tighten in his gut. He had known Frank for years, sharing an occasional coffee in the pre-dawn hours. He knew there was more to the old man than his humble job suggested. There were stories, whispers among the older chiefs of a time before digital systems, when men understood the souls of these steel beasts. "Ma'am," Davis tried again, "just give him 5 minutes." "What can it hurt?" "What it can hurt, Chief," Bennett shot back, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "is the chain of command. It hurts discipline. It makes a mockery of the technical expertise of my officers and sailors. Now remove him." She pointed a stiff finger toward the island superstructure. Frank looked at her pointing finger, then back at the silent catapult. He saw the frustration on the faces of the young technicians, boys and girls who had only ever known a world of touchscreens and diagnostic ports. They were trying to solve a problem of steel and steam by consulting with ghosts in the machine. He could see the faint shimmer of heat rising from the deck, smell the tang of salt and jet fuel, feel the deep rhythmic thrum of the ship's reactors far below. He was a part of this world in a way Bennett would never understand. He took a half step toward the catapult's control blister, his eyes following a line of hydraulic conduits. The backup release valve. He whispered more to himself than anyone else. The T-handle might be misaligned by a few millimeters. It happens when the temperature shifts too fast. Bennett's face flushed with red. This was the final straw. This old man, this janitor, was not only refusing a direct order, but was now openly contradicting her team's findings in front of her crew. He was undermining her authority with every quiet word. She looked at his hands. They were stained with grease and grime, the knuckles swollen with age, the nails permanently darkened. They were the hands of a laborer, a man who worked with filth. The sight of them so near her pristine billion-dollar aircraft filled her with a strange, deep disgust. "Security to the flight deck," she said, her voice cold and hard as steel, speaking into her radio. "I have an unauthorized civilian interfering with flight operations. Escort him off the deck. Now." As she stared at Frank's old, weathered hands, a flicker of an image, sharp and vivid, cut through the present moment. It wasn't Frank's memory, but the truth of his past, hanging unseen in the air between them. The image was of those same hands, 30 years younger, stronger, gliding over a massive sheet of drafting paper. They were covered not in grime, but in graphite and ink. They held a slide rule with practiced ease, sketching the complex, intricate schematics for a revolutionary new steam catapult system. The very system now lying dormant at their feet. The hands weren't dirty. They were the hands of a creator, an architect of power. The memory faded, unseen, unheard, leaving only the biting wind and the rising toxic tension on the flight deck. The two security officers arrived, young, nervous, and armed. They saw the lieutenant commander, a figure of absolute authority, pointing at the quiet old man in the red coveralls. Their duty was clear. "Sir, you need to come with us," one of them said, his hand resting on Frank's arm. Frank didn't resist. He gave the catapult one last long look, like a doctor leaving a patient he knew he could save, and then turned to go. The embarrassment was thick and choking. The eyes of the entire flight deck crew were on him, a mixture of pity, confusion, and scorn. He was being marched away like a common trespasser. Chief Davis watched it happen, a hot, bitter anger rising in his throat. He saw Bennett turn away, her back straight, already barking new orders at her struggling engineers. She had won. She had asserted her authority. And in doing so, Davis was certain she had doomed them all to failure. He couldn't stand it. He couldn't let it end this way. While all eyes were on the small, sad procession of Frank and his security escort, Davis slipped away from the controlled chaos. He moved with a purpose that denied his age. Ducking behind a row of parked aircraft, his boots clanging on the steel deck, he descended a ladder into the huge hangar bay, then another, moving deeper into the ship's maze like corridors. He ignored the questioning looks of sailors he passed. He had one destination. He arrived at a small, out-of-the-way communications room, a place reserved for non-urgent back-channel comms. He knew the Master Chief on duty, an old friend. "I need to make a call, Roberts," Davis said, his voice tight. "It's an emergency." The Master Chief nodded, pointing to a secure satellite phone terminal. "Go for it." Davis took a deep breath and punched in a number he hadn't dialed in 10 years, a number he knew from memory. It was a direct line to a senior office at the Naval Sea Systems Command headquarters in Washington, D.C. It was a number you only called if a ship was on fire or sinking. After 2 rings, a crisp voice answered. "Master Chief Petty Officer Williams." "Roberts, it's Chief Davis on the Defiance," Davis said, speaking fast. "Listen, I don't have time to explain. We've got a Category 1 failure on our main catapult. Been down for 6 hours, the engineers are stumped, but that's not why I'm calling. There's a man here, a civilian contractor. His name is Frank Sullivan." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sullivan. Spell it." "Sullivan. Frank Sullivan. He knew what the problem was just by listening to it. He tried to help, but the flight deck officer just had him arrested and taken off the deck. Davis could hear the faint sound of a keyboard clacking on the other end. He waited, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had just gone over an officer's head, violated every rule in the book. His career could be over. Then Master Chief Williams's voice came back on the line, and all the crisp professionalism was gone. It was replaced by something else, something that sounded like pure total shock. Davis, where did you say this man Sullivan is right now, being escorted off the flight deck? Probably to the brig. The officer, a Lieutenant Commander Bennett, she called him the garbage man. A sharp, explosive curse echoed down the satellite link from Washington. Stay where you are, Chief, Williams said, his voice now a blade of pure urgency. Do not move. I have to make a call. God help us all. The line went dead. Inside a silent, climate-controlled office overlooking the Anacostia River, Master Chief Williams stood frozen for a second before sprinting out of his cubicle. He didn't knock on the heavy wood door at the end of the hall. He burst through it. Admiral Harrison, a four-star officer in charge of fleet readiness, looked up from a stack of reports, his face a thundercloud of annoyance at the intrusion. Williams, this had better be the start of World War III. Sir, it might be worse, Williams said out of breath. He placed a hand on the Admiral's desk to steady himself. I just got a call from the USS Defiance. Their Catapult one is down hard, but sir, they have Frank Sullivan on board. The Admiral's expression of anger dissolved, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. He slowly took off his reading glasses. Frank Sullivan. Are you sure? We lost track of him 20 years ago. The service records listed him as deceased 5 years back after a clerical error. It's him, sir, Williams confirmed. He's working as a civilian contractor in sanitation. The flight deck officer just had him arrested for interfering. Admiral Harrison stared at Williams, and in his eyes the Master Chief saw decades of naval history flash by. The Admiral was a pilot by trade. He had been launched off carriers for 30 years. He knew the legends. He knew the names of the men who had built the very foundations of naval aviation. They were myths whispered about in ready rooms and engineering bays, and the name Frank Sullivan was at the very top of that list. He was the last surviving member of the legendary Iron Anvil, the small genius team that designed the C-13 Catapult system used on every Nimitz-class carrier. The man wasn't just an expert, he was the author. Get me the captain of the Defiance. The Admiral's voice was dangerously quiet. Priority 1 channel. Override all other traffic. Now. Back on the windswept flight deck of the USS Defiance, Lieutenant Commander Bennett was trying to regain control of a situation that was spiraling away from her. The removal of the old man had not solved the problem. Her team was still stumped, their morale shattered. The air was thick with their silent resentment and her own simmering frustration. She had followed protocol. She had maintained discipline, and she had failed. Run the Level 3 diagnostics again, she commanded, her voice sounding hollow to her own ears. I want a full system reboot. Ma'am, we've done that 3 times, the young sailor replied, his face pale with exhaustion. It won't fix a mechanical fault. Before Bennett could respond, the ship's main broadcast system, the 1MC, crackled to life, silencing every conversation across the vast vessel. The voice that boomed from the speakers was not a recording. It was live, and it was filled with a barely controlled fury. It was the voice of the ship's captain. Lieutenant Commander Bennett, you report to the flight deck control tower immediately. All security personnel, stand down. If you are with Mr. Frank Sullivan, you will unhand him this instant and treat him with the respect of a visiting dignitary. That is a direct order from the captain. A wave of stunned silence rolled across the flight deck. Heads snapped up. Bennett froze, her face draining of all color. The call-out was a public rebuke of the highest order. Then she saw him. Captain Raymond Pierce, a man known for his unshakable demeanor, was sprinting out of the island's superstructure, his face twisted in a mask of panic and rage. He wasn't walking. He was running, a thing she had never seen him do. He was followed by the ship's executive officer and the chief engineer, all of them looking as if they were responding to a missile impact. They bypassed Bennett as if she were a ghost, their eyes scanning the deck until they found Frank standing quietly between his 2 bewildered security guards. Captain Pierce skidded to a halt in front of him, breathing heavily. Mr. Sullivan, the captain said, his voice filled with a desperate respect that shocked everyone who heard it. Sir, I am Captain Pierce. I cannot begin to apologize for the treatment you have received on my ship. Frank simply nodded, his calm a stark contrast to the captain's frantic energy. Pierce then turned and his eyes fell upon Bennett. The look he gave her could have melted steel. He walked toward her, his voice low and carrying across the deck with terrifying clarity. "Commander, do you have any idea who that man is?" "He's a civilian contractor, sir." "He was interfering," she began, her own voice trembling. "That man," the captain cut her off, "is Frank Sullivan. He was the lead design engineer for the C-13 steam catapult. He wrote the operational manuals your team is using as a coaster for their coffee cups. He personally oversaw the installation of the catapults on the USS Nimitz, the Eisenhower, and the Vincent. He holds patents on half the components in that system. He has forgotten more about steam-powered launch systems than your entire engineering department will ever know. He isn't just a contractor, Commander. He is a living legend, and you called him the garbage man." The words fell like hammer blows. A collective gasp went through the assembled crew. The young technicians, who had been struggling for hours, stared at Frank, their expressions shifting from confusion to awe. The pilots, leaning against the bodies of their jets, stood up straight. They were looking at the man who had created the very force that had hurled them into the sky thousands of times. The captain turned back to Frank Sullivan. In a gesture that sealed the moment in the ship's history, he drew himself to his full height, his back straight as a rod, and gave a slow, perfect salute to the old man in the greasy coveralls. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "the USS Defiance would be honored if you would help us." The rebuke was complete, the clearing absolute. Captain Pierce turned to Bennett one last time, his voice now without anger, replaced by a weary disappointment. "Commander, your primary failure today wasn't technical. It was a failure of perception. You saw a uniform, not a man. You saw a job title, not a lifetime of experience. Your duty is to leverage every asset at your disposal to ensure the combat readiness of this vessel. And you dismissed the single most valuable asset we have because he was not in the proper box on your flowchart. You are confined to your quarters until further notice. I will decide your fate later." Bennett could only nod, her face a mask of shame. She had been so focused on the rigid lines of authority that she had become completely blind to the truth standing right in front of her. Frank watched her go, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He then turned to the captain. "It's not the young woman's fault, Captain," he said, his voice gentle. "Your systems have become too reliant on what the computer tells them. The machine has a soul, a rhythm. You teach your people to read the screens, but you've forgotten to teach them how to listen to the ship." He walked toward the silent catapult, the crowd of sailors parting before him like the Red Sea. He knelt down, his old knees protesting, and reached into his coverall pocket. He pulled out a small, peculiar-looking wrench. It was handmade, forged from dark, heavy steel, with a handle wrapped in worn leather. It was an object of deep simplicity and purpose. As his fingers closed around the familiar tool, another brief echo of the past surfaced. He saw a much younger version of his mentor, the brilliant and stubborn lead designer of the Iron Anvil project, pressing this very wrench into his hand. It was the day of their first successful full-power test launch. "The factory ones are all the same," his mentor had grumbled. "No feel to them. This one listens. It will tell you when the torque is just right. Don't ever lose it." He hadn't. For over 50 years, it had been his constant companion, a key to unlocking the secrets of steel and steam. Ignoring the advanced diagnostic equipment placed around the catapult, Frank laid a hand on the cold steel housing of the launch valve. He closed his eyes. The deck crew watched in hushed silence. He was like a physician examining a patient, feeling for a pulse, for the subtle signs of life or distress. He ran his stained fingers along a conduit, then tapped it lightly with the custom wrench. He leaned in, placing his ear against the metal. "There," he whispered. He stood up and pointed with the wrench. "It's the tertiary bypass governor. It's stuck open by a fraction of a hair. The sensors can't detect a fault that small, but it's enough to bleed off all your pressure." The chief engineer stared at the spot. "But that's a sealed unit, Mr. Sullivan. We'd have to disassemble the entire valve assembly to get to it. That would take 12 hours. You don't need to disassemble it, Frank said. He placed the head of his strange wrench on a specific bolt on the valve's housing, a bolt no one had paid any attention to. Sometimes you just need to remind it who's in charge. With a practiced fluid motion, he tapped the wrench 3 times. Not hard, but with a precise, resonant percussion. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was sharp and clear in the sudden silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then deep within the complex machinery, there was a faint click, followed by a low, powerful hiss. It was the sound of thousands of pounds of steam pressure suddenly building, equalizing, coming to life. A collective sigh of relief went through the crowd. The digital readouts on the engineer's tablet, once a sea of red error messages, flashed green. All systems were nominal. Frank straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag from his pocket. He gave the catapult a final affectionate pat. "She's ready," he said to the captain. 10 minutes later, the crew of the USS Defiance watched in reverent silence as the FA-18 Super Hornet was brought to full power. With a deafening roar and a cataclysmic cloud of steam, the catapult fired, slinging the 44,000 lb aircraft from a dead stop to 165 km in under 2 seconds. It soared into the sky, a perfect launch. A ragged cheer erupted across the flight deck. In the days that followed, the story of Frank Sullivan spread through the fleet like wildfire. The Navy conducted a full review of the incident on the Defiance. Lieutenant Commander Bennett was not discharged, but she was reassigned. Her new duty was to lead a special task force charged with creating a new program, the Legacy Skills Initiative, designed to identify and document the institutional knowledge of veteran civilian contractors and retired personnel before it was lost forever. 2 weeks later, Bennett, now in simple working khakis, found Frank Sullivan in the ship's huge recycling center. The air was filled with the smell of pulped paper and the rhythmic clatter of machinery. He was showing a young seaman how to properly sort and process plastics. He saw Bennett approach and simply nodded. "Mr. Sullivan," she began, her voice quiet and stripped of its former arrogance. "I wanted to apologize, not just for my actions, but for my attitude. I was wrong. I was so focused on the book, I forgot that people write the books." Frank stopped his work and gave her his full attention. "The most complicated machine on this ship isn't the reactor or the catapult, Commander," he said kindly. "It's the crew. It's 1,000 people all working together. Sometimes the most important part isn't the one with the highest rank. It's the one that knows how to listen." He smiled, a rare and gentle thing. "You'll do fine with your new project. You're smart. Just remember to use your ears as much as your eyes." He then turned back to his work, leaving her with a lesson that would redefine the rest of her career. She watched him for a moment longer, the unassuming hero, the forgotten genius, quietly doing his job in the heart of the great steel ship he had helped to create. If you were moved by Frank Sullivan's story of quiet dignity and hidden genius, show your support by liking this video. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, and share it with someone who appreciates the unassuming heroes who walk among us every day.